everyone. Buenas noches. Good evening. My name is Liz Fernandez. I am the Job Fair Administrator. This is my 23rd year serving in this role. I'm also a previous Job Fair candidate and believe intensely in the experience of providing schools and candidates with the opportunity to learn more about the opportunities that are present in independent schools for all candidates, and in particular for candidates of color who are interested in serving in teaching and administrative positions at our schools. As you know, the NYSAIS Job Fair will be in person this year. It will be held on Saturday, March 4th from 10 to 1:30 at Columbia Grammar and Preparatory School. There's information on our website. We encourage you to please pre-register, and we are grateful you are here this evening or viewing this at your pleasure to meet and learn from our three panelists this evening who will be speaking to the intersection of being an alum of an independent school and also a current employee of color within an independent school. I'm going to briefly introduce each of our panelists, and then I will pose a question and invite them to take it from there. So we have this evening, we have Janelli, who is an alum of the Petty School, which is a boarding school in New Jersey. She currently serves as the Dean of the class of 2023, so the seniors, and is a Spanish language teacher at Riverdale Country School, which is a co-ed day school in the Bronx. And she's also an independent school parent of 2 students. Also joining us is Kamar, who is an alum of the Dalton School, which is a day school in Manhattan. He currently serves as middle and upper school English teacher at Spence, which is an all-girls day school on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And finally, we have Sam, who's an alum of Village Community School, which is a pre-K-8 day school in the Village, and the Dalton School, which is an Upper East Side day school, continuing K-12, where he graduated from VCS, Village Community, and then continued his education at Dalton. He currently serves as the lower school outdoor learning specialist at Riverdale Country School, the lower campus. And as you know, it's a co-ed day school in the Bronx, and he's working with the littles. So we are really excited to welcome you. We want to hear a little more about you, about the work that you're currently doing, the role, how long you've been where you are, what do you like about the school that you're currently working in, and the role in particular that you're in. So what, how would you like to introduce yourself to our audience that is viewing us this evening? And I'd love to start with Kamar and then invite Sam and Janelli.
Sure, thank you, Liz. So again, I'm Kamar Robinson. I'm currently teaching at Spence Middle School English. I'm also an instructional coach, and I can talk more about that momentarily, what that entails. Sometimes schools have unique positions that are kind of specific to that institution, and or they create opportunities along the way that could be exciting when you're in the mood or you're at a position where you're looking for opportunities outside of teaching or only teaching, and instructional coaching is one of them. So I'll definitely get into that some more momentarily. So I've been at Spence for 5 years now. And prior to Spence, I actually have made my way through many private schools at this point. So prior to Spence, I was teaching in LA at another private school, the Windward School, not affiliated to the one in New York. There's another Windward School in New York. And that school was a 7 through 12 school. Similarly, I taught English, but at that school, I taught 7, 8, and 10th grade English. So I had an opportunity to be in multiple divisions. Again, some schools provide that opportunity, some schools do not. Depends on the structure and of their organization. Prior to Windward, I taught at Fieldston, the Fieldston School, Ethical Culture Fieldston School. which is a K through 12 school. And I taught on the Riverdale campus in the Bronx, and I taught 8th grade English there. Similarly, there were other opportunities to be involved outside the classroom, such as being a faculty rep to the head of school. I can talk more about those positions, that position later. But that was an opportunity to advise the head of school on matters that pertain to teaching in the middle school. So that was a wonderful opportunity to kind of see how, kind of moving the curtain, see how the sausage gets made on some level, and having that direct access, being an advocate, I think was truly helpful in kind of shaping the rest of my career and my trajectory. And of course, I attended Dalton School. I attended Dalton. It's a K through 12 school, as Liz said, but I attended Dalton. I entered in 9th grade, and through an organization called the Albert G. Oliver Program, or I think better known now as the Oliver Program. And its purpose mainly was to attract and prepare bright, gifted students, students of color in public schools in New York City, and prepare them for a life in independent schools, both in the city as well as boarding schools, primarily outside the city. Many folks are familiar, maybe more familiar with the Prep for Prep program, very similar, but just working with smaller contingents or class sizes.
Thanks, Kumar.
Did I miss a question? Probably did. I'm sorry, Liz.
No, you're all set. I was just going to say thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Sam?
All right, my name is Sam Shapiro. I currently am, like Liz said, the outdoor learning specialist at Riverdale Country School on the lower school campus, which kind of speaks to what Kamar was just talking about with how some of these schools really create and craft positions specifically for their own needs and create unique opportunities that way. Prior to that, so like Liz said, I went to Village Community School for K through 8 and then Dalton for 9 through 12. And prior to working at Riverdale Country School, this is my second year there, I was at Village Community School as well as an AT, an associate teacher for 2 years. So I've now been in New York City independent schools for 3.5 years. And despite growing up in the system, this has been my first time coming back to work in them. Prior to that, all of my experience in schools was up in Maine. So before this, I spent a couple of years as a Head Start teacher in mixed age classrooms from about 32 months through pre-K. I also did in-home behavioral work. And prior to that, I worked with 7th through 12th graders at an AmeriCorps program site at an alternative school for special ed students who are in and out of youth prison, high ACEs, essentially across the board. So kids who'd really fallen out of the system. So that's kind of my teaching background, how I got to where I am now. Prior to this year, stepping into this new role, I was also an AT at Riverdale. So I've really gone through that kind of AT mentorship system that is very common, at least in the private schools, independent schools here in the city. And then, like I said, Riverdale really saw something that worked well for me and offered me essentially this positional shift, which falls much more in line with my own personal interests. Kind of given my history, my background as I've stepped into education, my real interest has always been thinking more about what I guess we would call really the like SEL, the social emotional side, much of it through a trauma focused lens. That's a bit more of my background before I came into education. And so this kind of unique role that is afforded to me here at Riverdale really allowed me to step back into that space. It's a role now being outside the classroom where I'm given a tremendous amount of latitude and creativity in the program that I put together, the way I approach the work that I do with the students. It's very interdisciplinary. I'm reaching across all of the grade levels we have at the lower school campus, which is pre-K to 5. And it's also primarily focused, interestingly enough, really on play and how do we make sure we're fostering and supporting play and growth through play on our campus, and really making sure that even in this independent school world, which can be very, very challenging in terms of the intensity of the schedule and the academic pressures, that we're still finding ways to make sure that this is a priority, and that it can be really built into everything that we're doing.
Thanks, Sam. Hey, Janelle.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Liz, for having me here. So I'll start from the beginning and quickly work my way up. So I had the opportunity to attend Petty School, New Jersey, 9 through 12 boarding school. And I went through a Better Chance program, similar to Oliver, Prefa Prep Teak. For me, that was the most transformative learning experience of my life. So then I did college, and then a year after college, I worked in human resources for Chase. And I had, a little light bulb moment, kind of like, what am I doing? This isn't for me. Luckily enough, Petty had an opportunity, and they welcomed me back. So like Sam, right? I went back home for a little bit, and no, actually not a little bit, a lot of it. So I stayed at Petty for about 10 years, teaching Spanish, dorm life, coaching, everything boarding school life entails. Loved it. But since I grew up in New York, I wanted to come back to New York for a little bit. And at that time, I had 2 little kids, so I wanted to be close to family. And an opportunity to teach Spanish at Riverdale popped up. And I interviewed. I loved, what really struck me was the language department. I just loved how welcoming, innovative they were. It really struck a chord. So I accepted the position. And I've been at Riverdale for, this is my 8th year. And currently I am Dean of the class of 2023 and also teaching Spanish. But during that time, what I love about Riverdale, I'll tell you right now, is I've gotten so many opportunities to try all kinds of roles. So teacher, mentor, facilitator for pedagogy and technology, little seminar for teachers, advisor, just all kinds of roles that I got to try on. And I think because of that, I was like, you know what, I want to work more in student life. And that's how I fell into now, the dean of the class of 2023.
Thanks, Janelle. Thanks all of you for introducing yourselves. So, part of the time that we are spending together, and as I think about what candidates, as they prepare for their pursuing of employment at independent schools, is wanting them to really tap into the reason why so many of us, I would hope most, if not all of us, join these schools and stay. And it's really the young people that are entrusted to our care, regardless of whether we're working with the littles, the middles, or the older students. Young people are amazing, and the ways in which they think and learn and approach information and is really truly inspiring. And so I'm going to ask the 3 of you to think about what were some of the highlights that you had as an independent school student. And you can certainly draw from your time, Sam, K-12, Kamar and Janelle drawing from 9-12. I'm hopeful that you have some really wonderful moments, some key exchanges, some really clear and powerful experiences that you had while you were an independent school student that you think both exemplify what it meant for you through a positive lens, and also something that might be helpful and inspiring to candidates who are listening to this webinar and preparing. So I would love to invite Sam for you to go first, Janelle 2, and then Kamar 3.
Sure. Great. There are a few things that really stick out to me. I think if there's one broader topic or piece of independent schools that I experience and I continue to experience teaching in them now, it's the prioritization of the arts, whether it's music, Village Community School, where again, I went during my younger years and then taught, has a great woodshop program, for example. In all the independent schools that I've been a part of, theater has been a really big priority. And to me, what these different places and spaces on these school campuses really provide is, first and foremost, for me, it was like a real creative outlet that felt supported and open, you know, in no small way, an escape from reading and writing and math, which I know we all appreciated as kids, and we had those little moments. But, you know, it's one of those things where, like, when I think back on my experience, you know, like, sure, you might remember a writing assignment here, or when you learned like order of operations, or like these little kind of like foundational academic nuggets, but it's not the stuff that you really like reminisce on or that you feel nostalgic about. It's those moments that feel outside of the academics. And I think that that's something that, again, across the board, being a student and now teaching in them, that I feel like there are really a plethora of opportunities for. And, you know, to expand on that too, I think that having all of these options, and I'm highlighting the arts, but it really goes beyond that. It allows you to really, if you seek it out, there's usually a space for you to find something that really clicks and connects with you. Because these schools, you know, they have, for the most part, a wealth of resources. They can put on a lot of these different programming pieces, and it allows you as a student to really, again, search and explore. And if there's something that you really are interested in, it's probably there. And if not, there's probably a teacher who's willing to support you, or a teacher who's already seeing what you're interested in and plucking you for that. So for me, that example comes from high school. When I switched to Dalton, for me, it was a very rough transition, going from one school through 8th grade and then switching to a different school. And I didn't really feel like I found my footing in terms of finding a place at Dalton until sophomore year, when I was just at school after hours and there are other clubs and different things happening. And there was a teacher advisor who was there while I was in the computer lab playing video games with my friends, because that's what we would do. We would hang out at school until like 6 o'clock and play video games on the computer. But, you know, so I was walking down the hall, probably to use the bathroom or something, and there was a history teacher who was advising the Model Congress group. And they had someone who had dropped out, and she wasn't even my teacher, but she knew me a bit. She had taught someone else who I was close with previously. And she asked me if I was interested in just dropping in, learning about it, seeing if it was something that I'd be interested in, because they needed to fill the spot for the weekend. It was like on a Tuesday. And from then on, that was one of the big extracurriculars that I stuck with in school. It's where a lot of those friendships that got me through high school were grounded in. And again, it's that kind of a little moment where a teacher sees you, thinks something might click, draws you in. That's something that I felt really strongly was available to me being in an independent school, and something I feel like I still see teaching in them now.
Thanks. Denali?
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off of Sam in terms of, I like how you phrase that, you know, the teacher is drawing you in. I have a lot of those moments. I felt very lucky to have those moments. But one that really stuck out to me also has to do with the arts. It was our school at Petty had the yearly declamation contest, right? So kind of like monologue contest. And I had never really performed before that. And my drama teacher really said, you know, Janelle, you should really go for this. And I was like, wait, why? What is this? And he helped me find a piece to perform. And I remember how nervous I was before that. But just having that teacher's encouragement, and just thinking back to that drama class, how small it was, that was really important, right? So I felt I got safer to take those risks. That kind of moment really sticks out. And there are tons of other moments just like that, like sports wise, you know, class wise. But really, I think the encouragement of teachers and really the small class size really sticks out to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure. So for me, I think there are a few things that come to mind when I think back at my experience at Dalton. The first has to be, I hated English up until 11th grade. I just found it to be boring. I didn't see the purpose of Shakespeare and reading sonnets, and poetry, at least the poetry that we read, never did anything for me. And, you know, those canonical texts, Homer's Odyssey, that was 9th grade. I just found that all to be tedious. And at the time, I think, you know, I was very much interested in the sciences and math. And so, you know, when it came to prioritizing my work, you know, English class was the one that I would do last, right? And I wasn't as hip with like Cliff Notes. Was it Cliff Notes? I think it was Cliff Notes back then. And, you know, I just tried to do my best, which wasn't enough, right? And 11th grade, I remember, so I'm in American literature class, and we started off the year, I thought, a little differently than I was used to. It was still, of course, we still had to read some canonical texts, but there was a philosophical slant. So Emerson, we were reading Emerson. We were reading Hawthorne. And I was like, oh, wow, I didn't know literature can actually explore ideas without having to just simply focus on kind of plot narrative and, you know, metaphors and literary devices, similes and all that. Well, then we hit Moby Dick, and back, you know, downhill, like plunged, right? I thought we were going to start on a high, plunge down, and that was painful. That was difficult. And we had to write a paper as the culminating piece for the unit. And I remember just, you know, trying to throw something together at the last minute. The teacher read it and, you know, had it. And he scheduled a meeting. We met in his office, and he was, you know, very upset, right? And he said, you know, what was going on here? And I told him, I was just very honest, like, I just hate English. And he was like, you know what? I'm not going to allow you to have that experience in my class, his class. And so we came up with a plan, which was to meet weekly during his office hours. And that's one of the first things that I think is really remarkable about these independent school students, have opportunities to meet with their teachers for 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and have that one-on-one meeting time to talk about a class, talk about a lesson, to review material, just like you would in the college or university setting. And we did. And for me, having opportunities to kind of be mentored and to have my confidence in many ways be grounded in, I think, my own experiences. He was guiding me to show me that literature does not have to be the voice of a few, right? Predominantly dead white male authors, but that there's a rich history of literature by Black authors. And we ended the year with reading Ellison, from Emerson to Ellison, Ralph Ellison, Invisible Man. And for me, that was what really put me on the trajectory to be an English teacher. And, you know, to this day, I think back, I even share with my students that, one, I learned that, yes, a teacher can make a difference. But two, that, you know, having these small class sizes really allows you to be not just a number in a room, but really to be a person, and to bring your own experiences forth to the discussion, and to see how your own experiences help shape how meaning is made, that meaning is not fixed, but that is really dynamic. So there's that. Another experience that really stood out to me had to do with attending a conference. This conference was called the Student Diversity Leadership Conference, sponsored by the I know you're not going to remember all these acronyms, National Association of Independent Schools, basically this body that invites educators and students to attend conferences each year in a different city. So I attended this student diversity leadership conference, and it was in San Francisco. Mind you, right? I born and raised in Brooklyn. You know, the farthest I probably went at that time or traveled at that time was to Jamaica, where my family is from, and probably New Jersey. And so for the school to provide this opportunity for me to go across the country, all expenses paid, and to develop, really refine my leadership, showed me how much they're invested in my education, and that education is not, you know, simply, again, what happens within these four walls within the core disciplines, but that it's much more than that, you know, kind of similar to the Model UN example that Sam gave. And so those two experiences really stood out to me, you know, eventually leading me to, again, being a teacher and hoping to be a facilitator of those opportunities for students, which I, you know, I hope I still do today.
Thank you all so much. You know, in your responses, you indicated both some really key examples of moments when adults made significant difference. And I'm thrilled for that. You also, I think, in some ways articulated a bit of a challenge. I mean, Janelle, you had never really spoken in front, so, you know, you had this opportunity, and, you know, Sam being part of this, you know, Model Congress, or is it Model UN?
I did Model Congress.
It was Model Congress. Okay. So participating in Model Congress, you know, which again, similar to Janelle, draws on students needing to prepare in advance and you know, articulate role, responsibility, policy with such emphatic belief, and obviously preparation and research. And then Kamar, I mean, the irony of your story is not lost on anyone. You know, not liking English, and now, you know, you've been an English teacher, and you've been that person who has impacted the young people that you have taught over the years. You know, thank you all for those reflections and those stories. I would love to hear from you, and Janelle, I'm going to ask you to start. What tell us a little bit about your professional journey. I mean, you each alluded to it a little bit as you're telling us where you went, but more specifically, how did you end up teaching in an independent school? What was the reason that you and you're now in this role in these schools, having graduated from them? Was this something that you thought, oh, maybe I might do this in the future? Was this a completely different, you know, did something happen that created the opportunity for you to consider this as a viable option? Tell us a little more about the professional journey and how you ended up working as an educator in these schools. So Janelle, I'd love for you to start, and Kamar, I'd love for you to go second, and then Sam.
No, so this was not a thought at all, right? So all during high school, very typical of first generation children, right? I was thinking of how to make my parents proud, right? What roles they would understand as like meaning as I've achieved, you know, a certain level of success. So I thought doctor. So that's what I was thinking about in high school. So when I got to college, that's what I had in mind. After the first year, I saw that wasn't in the cards. So I started going towards what I was gravitating really towards, which was cultural anthropology. And when I heard that title for that major, I was like, oh my gosh, that makes sense. That's what I've really been interested in my whole life, but I didn't realize it had that title, right? So that's what I studied. At that point, I wasn't really thinking, oh gosh, what career I could do with this. I was really kind of going with, you know, hope and a prayer that everything will work out. So during that time in college, actually, I was connected to Inroads, which is a program that places, college age people of color in internships. So I had some great internships, which led me right to work with JP Morgan Chase. And that's how I kind of fell into that role, because in my head, I was like, okay, if I'm not going to be a doctor, I'll be in the business world and really try to climb that ladder. After a year, I was pretty miserable. It didn't jive with my inner soul. I could just feel it. Even people near me were like, you're not the same. And when I heard that, that really, pushed the knife in a little more, because I knew that they were right. So how I made that jump, knowing that feeling, I went to an alumni event for Petty, and the head of school was there. And he said, jokingly, not jokingly, Janelle, you should really come back and teach. And I was like, ha, 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 ha. Well, a month later, I emailed him and I was like, is there any opportunity? And then after that, the door opened, and that's how I landed back at Petty. And I was so happy to have had that opportunity. So that's actually something I want to highlight. For those who are watching, right, wondering, right, do I need some kind of certification, or I can't speak for all schools, but for the ones I know, not necessarily. Yes, they want, a bachelor's and maybe even a master's or advanced degree. But in terms of certification, I haven't seen too much of that. But of course, I can't speak to all the schools, read the requirements. So anyway, that afforded me the opportunity to get into independent schools. And that's how I started the journey.
Janelle, your experience is very similar to mine. So after Dalton, I attended the University of Rochester, focusing on like a pre-med track. And I made it to Orgo. So that's like a junior year, when I realized, you know what, let me put this on hold. And at the time, I just decided to put this on hold. I didn't say, I didn't kind of put away that dream at the time of becoming a doctor. Again, likewise, like Janelle, focusing on or being heavily influenced by my Jamaican heritage and the expectations that, success meant these very few career fields. So after I graduated with a BA in English. I was kind of set on doing a pre-med post-bac, right? Just focusing on the sciences, nothing else, get it done. And I think it's like, they're like 2-year programs, something like that. And I remember visiting Dalton at the time, and I visited the office for the diversity director, and she was saying to me that she needs some help in the office. And so I was like, well, I have some time. Sure, I'd be happy to help. And so I was working with her for about a semester, a couple times a week, when she said, you know what, I think you work so well with children, with our students, why not be a teaching fellow? And I'm like, okay, now you're saying too much, you're doing too much. Me in the classroom, wasn't ready, wasn't on my radar. And she said, no, the fellowship program allows you to, slowly take on the responsibilities of, teaching, but at a pace, through a mentorship by a veteran classroom teacher, lead classroom teacher. And I was like, okay, I guess, I trust you. And I think with many adults at Dalton, I trusted them. And so the following year, I was a teaching fellow in a 6th grade English classroom, right? So there was a lead teacher. I was in the room as well. It's almost like being a teaching assistant. And, we went through lesson planning, what that looks like, and book selection, what that looks like. And I was involved in meetings. I was also an advisor, a co-advisor. And after that year, there was an opportunity to be a lead teacher at Fieldston, teaching 8th grade English. And again, the folks at Dalton encouraged me to move forward. to go forth unafraid. And I did, and the rest is history.
I also had no designs on being a teacher. So for me, I remember thinking during my undergrad, as I actually have quite a few friends who went into either teaching or social work. Those two seem to be very connected amongst my friends in college. I remember actively thinking, I don't want to be a teacher. To me, it was like, I'm going through however many years, we can count them, but we don't need to, of being and sitting through classes just to go right back to it and regurgitate those same things that I've been instilled with. That feels pointless. I took one education class in undergrad, and I only took it because it cross-listed with my major. But I graduated college, and I felt like I did not know what I wanted to do. I knew I did not want to move back home to New York. I wanted time and space for my family, as I know so many of us did at some point. And I felt like I didn't have many usable skills. Like, I had done a decent amount of direct service work and kind of like crisis and hotline support in that like trauma interest field. And then I had been a barista, and that's like what I had. So coming out of college that summer was a lot of anxiety as I was trying to find jobs. I was looking actually at education positions with some of the kind of trauma focused organizations in Maine that would go into school and do workshops in education and assemblies and stuff like that with kids. Didn't get any of those jobs. And I was like, that's got to be it. And then when that didn't manifest, I was like, all right, let me also look at the coffee shops and like get something so I can work through it. And that was just a long drawn out process. And so eventually in the back of my head, I remembered AmeriCorps being mentioned by the Career Planning Center. And so that's how I ended up finding my AmeriCorps position at this school that really served like kids who, we were under one district, and I would say like 60-70% of our students were from out of district, and all being sent to us because those districts, and the districts were paying full money for them to come to us because they could not figure out what to do with them. So it was a really challenging situation. It hit on my interest in working with populations predisposed to trauma because many of those kids had already experienced it. So I was able to, that was really how I found that position, and I was able to access that interest through school. And for me, that really opened up my imagination and my understanding of what school can be, right? Like, teaching academics was never the center of my interest, but there's all this other stuff that happens that makes a person and their experience and shapes them to experience the world and be able to pursue those things that make them happy and then interest them. And this was a place where I could really dig into that. And so after my 2 years there, I was hooked on staying in education. But again, the idea of independent schools with primarily affluent families, in my experience growing up, primarily white families, like, did not want to go back to that world, which is part of why I went to Head Start. Staying in Maine, again, populations who are predisposed to those negative outcomes, and how do we do that prime preventative work to work against it? And that was a great experience. I loved Head Start. It's still my favorite teaching experience that I've had. But eventually I kind of just hit the point where I was ready to move on from Maine. That also coincided with some issues at the organization that was running the Head Start programs I was at. Funny how those things work together. And so I came back to New York and lived at home with my parents. Because for me, I just needed a place to reset. And in my head, I had maybe like 3 or 4 different avenues I could go. I knew that if I wanted to stay in education, especially if I wanted to work public, I would need to pursue that master's. Again, I took 1 education class in undergrad. So currently I am working towards my master's. Really, like, both I wanted to educate myself more, but also those certifications, thinking about that. And when I kind of made the decision that I would stay here, I would try to figure out working as a teacher in the city and eventually pursue that master's. That's kind of how I ended up shifting to independent schools. The person who was the assistant head when I worked at Village Community School, she was there when I was a student. And she is someone who, because she supported, in particular, my family, but really specifically one of my brothers who is autistic. My family ends up developing a really close relationship with her. So when I decided to look at teaching in the city, she is someone who I reached out to as a resource. My plan was not to return to Village Community School, but it ended up being a very comfortable landing spot because they knew me. I knew them very well. And having seen me grow up and knowing what my work experience had been since then, they felt really comfortable taking me in, going through still a formal interview process. But, you know, really giving me a landing place to continue essentially my education, right? So I went there for 9 years and they decided to take me in and continue teaching me and helping me grow. So after 2 years there, which really was like my first formal experience teaching academics in any kind of an elementary setting, I decided, right, I'm here, I'm working my master's, let me try to find a nice landing spot to get through the rest of my program, and then reassess there. And so for me, trying to figure out where to go, I actually got to Riverdale through the NYSAIS Diversity Job Fair. Little plug, but it's true. And so that was an interesting experience because it was not like it's going to be this year where you're in person, you get to talk to people. It was Zoom boxes and pre-scheduled time slots, which was a really, in some ways, uncomfortable experience because the job fair felt a lot like recruitment, which was a totally new experience for me. But at the same time, having worked in education for several years before that, and then in independent schools for 2 years, it also made me realize and really gave me the opportunity to think about what it was that I really wanted out of that next school that I was going to work at, and really made me feel like I had the license to interview the schools as much as they were interviewing me, because for me, making sure it was a good fit was really important. Riverdale was a surprise choice for me because it is a school that I toured for high school and I almost walked off the tour. And it's for the exact reason of diversity, in that I asked the question when I was touring the high school, what does diversity look like at Riverdale? And the answer was not one that really met a standard that I felt worked for me. So for me to then go through this process years later and really kind of interrogate those questions of diversity and how these schools are moving forward with them, and to make that kind of really the center of my interview process, I found to be very helpful and informative. And for me, ultimately, I decided that this was a place that felt like they were really moving in a good direction in terms of their work in this space. And that's ultimately how I decided to end up there.
Thank you. I mean, just all of you, similar, different, you know, just how our lives, our paths, the moments lead us to where we are and the choices that we make. I really appreciate what each of you said, and just how you shared your story. I would love to ask you to briefly think about, so this is the penultimate two-part question. What do you enjoy most about the role that you currently have, and what's most challenging? So, we know what roles you're in. How would you answer that? What do you enjoy most? What's most challenging? Sam, if you could start briefly, and then Janelle, and then Kamar.
Yeah. So like I talked about earlier, my role is what to me feels like a unique role, even though the title is outdoor learning specialist, doesn't really capture the work that I do. And honestly, it kind of felt like we ended up with that title because we couldn't think of a title that really was appropriate to capture in 3 to 4 words what I'm doing. So for me, understanding that is part of what makes it really challenging, in that it's being defined as we go along. Everything I'm doing right now feels very experimental. Again, I'm trying new things. I'm seeing what works. I'm failing at a lot of things. But at the same time, right, I'm being given the grace to fail. And the space to like really work within that learning curve. So even though I'm having some of those really challenging days, especially, earlier in the year, days where it was like things feel like they're great, and then the next day it could be like real imposter syndrome feeling. Again, because there's no curriculum, there's no guide. I have people who I bounce ideas off of, but I don't have like a co-teacher or like a grade level team. It's really me, and what I'm doing is what I'm doing, and there's no one else who's doing what I'm doing there. So those are some of the things that make it really hard. But what I enjoy about it is all the things that make it hard, right? Like I have this amazing creative license to just do. I can throw ideas at the wall all year long and see what sticks and see what doesn't. I get to, again, day to day, really decide what it is that I want to focus on, what I want to pursue. And to me, it really feels like the position I'm in not just works towards my interests, but also that it's a position that's limitless in terms of the opportunities, limitless in terms of the growth potential of what I could shape this role into, because again, it's a role that I'm defining as I go along. And to have that opportunity as, I guess, technically the first year as a quote unquote full teacher, right? Because that AT label has been taken off. I've been moved to the HT pay scale line. So for that to be like the first opportunity where it's really here, we're trusting you in a full role, like that's something that's just really exciting that I really appreciate.
Thanks. And before you speak, I just want to clarify, AT associate or assistant teacher, HT head teacher. So it's a clear distinction that Sam has articulated in his role that, I mean, above all else, yes, you get to create, and it's grounded in play with pre-K through 5th grade students in an interdisciplinary way on a beautiful campus, where you get to be innovative and make connections through the joy of laughter and learning through play. So,
yeah. And I guess the last thing I would add on to that too is, everyone and what they enjoy and appreciate when it comes to child development is very different. But for me, being able to see that like growth trajectory over pre-K to 5 rather than being stuck in one age band is something that for me really, really makes this role something I cherish and really enjoy, because you really do get to see how they grow and develop and change as they go through the years. And I get to take all that and wrap it into what I'm doing and figure out how do I put together programming, not just across the age bands, but that will really get to build on one another in a way where seeing that vertical integration when you're a 1st grade teacher, a 2nd grade, what have you, tends to be a little bit harder.
So since I play a couple of roles, right, as a classroom teacher and a dean, I'll talk about the classroom part first. What I've enjoyed the most is also, like Sam, the flexibility and freedom I have to create the curriculum. We coordinate across sections, but I've been able, I'm a Spanish teacher, so I'm able to, and because of Riverdale, I'm able to bring a lot of my identity into the curriculum. So I'm Dominican, and New York, right, happens to have a lot of Dominicans. So we focused a lot of our curriculum on the Spanish speaking communities in New York, for Spanish 3, for example. So that to me has been a true joy to know that, yes, I'm sharing a piece of myself, but I'm also sharing New York, right? New York that a lot of these kids don't get to see. So I'm, I get really excited by that. As for my dean role, what's been very joyful is I've been able to see these kids kind of like Sam, right? You see the trajectory, 9th through 12th, because I stick with them through all of their high school experience. So that has been amazing. And they're seniors now, just finished first semester, getting into college, so just going through all those emotions with them has been exciting. In terms of challenge, going back to the classroom, same thing, right? I get to share a piece of me. But it can also be challenging, right? But I see it as a good challenge. You know, how do I get students who haven't experienced certain things to embrace it, right? Not just like hear it, but like embrace it. So that's an ongoing challenge. And as for the dean role, I mean, these past couple of years and the remnants of that, right? The pandemic and all the triple pandemic, right? That has been challenging, and how to try to get back to normal, but still respect the needs, right? That have been created. So that's been challenging. Yeah.
So for me, I also wear two hats. I teach 7th grade English. I'm also an instructional coach. I'll talk about English 7 first. I think the common thread here is just that autonomy in the classroom, right? Being able to and being trusted to design a curriculum for our students that allows me to also bring in aspects of my own identity, and to ask students to bring in theirs. And we're putting it all into the pot and trying to negotiate a space that allows everyone to feel that who they are is centered in the work that we do. I also like the continuing challenge that I think the outside world asks of us as educators. The world is always evolving in all types of respects. And I think within the independent schools that I've taught at, I've been allowed and in fact even encouraged to find creative ways to bring those conversations to our students and ask them to grapple with them and to even strategize and come up with their own possible solutions for those problems, all within English class. I think the challenge is the same thing. You know, the world is constantly evolving, and you have to be mindful of the politics of our time and the way that that changes or influences how we make meaning from the text that we read, and kind of the relevancy of certain texts in the classroom. And so having to negotiate what I think is important, along with what different constituencies, students, families, administrators would like for us to grapple with. As an instructional coach, at this point in my career, never really felt the desire to take on many administrative responsibilities, but I'm interested in stepping outside the classroom a bit. And so being an instructional coach allows me to partner with colleagues in different disciplines and work with adults now on classroom instruction, working on innovative ways to design curriculum. I think the challenge is that part of that has to, the finances can easily skyrocket when you're talking about innovation. The imagination can take us to all sorts of places. And so kind of, needing to prioritize, being mindful that, we are still, I guess, technically in the midst of a pandemic. And being mindful that many of these independent schools were and are impacted financially in some ways, and so what they have to prioritize will also impact what I prioritize.
Thank you all so very much. We have about 4 minutes, and so my final question is a challenge. There's lots of advice that you could offer candidates who are coming to the job fair. So we know that. What's one really important thing that you would want anyone who's listening to this, who's considering working in an independent school, what would be one piece of advice, and just briefly, think about what that one sentence would be. Kamar, you mentioned Cliff Notes earlier. What's like your one sentence Cliff Note, or Spark Notes as they use?
Spark Notes, that's it, yeah.
As they refer to today. Sam, Kamar, and Janelli. So from lower to middle to upper.
Yeah, I mean, my one thing, especially coming from not teaching in independent schools previously and working with disadvantaged populations, kids are kids, like pure and simple. Kids are kids. And if you hold that close to your heart as you go through this and wherever you work, you'll see that it's true. And the setting that we're in doesn't matter as much, as long as, that's at the center of what you're doing.
I would say to negotiate. And I'm not just talking about compensation, although that is part of it. To negotiate what you would like to bring to the school, if we're talking about teaching, right? And let's say you do have a vision that within 5 years or so, you would like to pilot or explore something outside the classroom, make that be known. And sometimes, even very frankly, ask for that thing to be in the contract. These schools provide opportunities, or can provide opportunities to support whatever it is that you would like to explore. But it's also a business, right? And things need to be conducted as such.
And I would say, don't compromise on who you are, right? Present your best self, but don't compromise on who you are. And I totally get it. It's easier to say for someone who, is more seasoned, and it's trickier when you're first starting out and you're not even sure what they're looking for, right? In the beginning, but it really is, if you go through it, putting your best foot forward, but not trying to hide aspects that you think, are good or great of yourself, then whatever the outcome, hopefully you'll feel just satisfied with the whole process because you did not compromise who you are. So that's what I would advise.
Great advice. Thank you so very much, Sam, Kamar, Janelli, for your time, for sharing your stories, taking us on a nostalgic journey through your experience as students and now as employees, doing really meaningful work, impacting the lives of young people entrusted to your care. I want to thank those of you that were able to join us live, and also those of you that have viewed this at your own time. Really, we aim to provide you with as much information and insight that will be helpful for you as you explore serving in a role within an independent school. As I mentioned at the beginning, I will close with the job fair is scheduled for Saturday, March 4th from 10 to 1:30. We encourage people to please pre-register. There are many different kinds of positions. There aren't just teaching positions. In the classroom, you can be teaching out and about, as Sam illustrated. There are also positions within different operational sides of the house. And by house, I mean of a school. So, the business office, finance, operations, etc. So there's many different opportunities to pursue. If you have questions, I encourage you to email us at jobfair@NYSAIS.org. That is my direct email. I will respond to you and gladly answer questions. And if an email is not your favorite form of communication, then let me know that you want to have a phone call or a Zoom call or whatever other video call platform works for you. We aim to support you in your process to be the most prepared candidate to secure as many potential opportunities as you possibly can on the 4th and beyond the 4th, really. And with that, I will close. I will thank our panelists once again. I will thank my colleagues at NYSAIS, and in particular, Shannon this evening. Thank you so much for your support behind the scenes and on camera. It is a pleasure to work with the NYSAIS team, and I wish you all a great evening. Please be healthy and safe. And feel free to reach out. We look forward to supporting you and seeing you at the job fair on March 4th. Good night, everyone. Buenas
Everybody.
noches.